Okay, let's talk about Australia. Because right now, in one of the wealthiest, most successful nations on the entire planet, something has gone catastrophically wrong. An economic model that was, the envy of the world for 30 years is starting to completely fall apart at the seams.
And it all boils down to this one really unsettling question. How does a place literally known as the lucky country, famous for its sunshine and its wealth, somehow find itself on the exact same path as one of history's most tragic economic collapses?
To really get a sense of this crisis, just look at that number, 47%. In Australia today, a new mortgage eats up nearly half of what a typical family earns. And that's before you pay for groceries, before you turn on the lights, before a single other bill gets paid. It's not just debt, it's a mathematical prison.
And what's so fascinating here is this giant gap between the brand and the reality. The world sees Australia as this perfect, sun-drenched paradise. But if you're actually living there, the country is morphing into a nation of debt slaves where the national dream is literally eating its own children.
And this really gets us to the core argument that we're exploring today. The idea that this isn't just a rough patch. It's that the country's economic DNA, this obsession with digging stuff out of the ground and betting on property, is a direct echo of Argentina's spectacular, century-long collapse. So the big question is, how on earth did this happen?
To understand how the dream got so broken, we have to go back in time and see what was lost. Because, believe it or not, Australia wasn't always like this. It used to be a world leader, a pioneer of the modern middle class.
You see, in the decades after World War II, Australia made this kind of revolutionary promise to its people. The government treated housing as a piece of national infrastructure, just like a highway or a power grid. The goal wasn't to create a speculative casino, it was to build a stable society.
And the numbers here, they just speak for themselves. I mean, look at this. Back in the 60s, a house cost maybe 3 or 4 times what an average person earned. Totally doable on a single working-class income. But today, in a city like Sydney, that number has just exploded. It's now 14 times the average salary. You need a household income of over $250,000 just to get your foot in the door. And because housing was cheap and stable, all the country's money and energy flowed into productive stuff. Australia actually made things. They had a massive car industry. They built their own washing machines and TVs. It was a complex, high-wage economy. But that stability, well, it was about to be weaponized.
Every story of collapse has that one moment, that flashpoint, where everything changes. For Australia, it has an exact date. A day when a tiny tweak to the tax code lit the fuse on a financial nuclear bomb. Okay, so get this. September 21st, 1999. The government rolls out this huge 50% discount on capital gains tax. Now on its own, it's just a nice tax break for investors. But it collided with this other, really weird loophole that already existed, and that collision changed everything.
And that loophole is called negative gearing. And you have to understand how this works because it's pretty wild. In most countries, right, if your investment loses money, too bad, you eat the loss. But in Australia's system, if your investment property costs you more than you make in rent, the government lets you subtract that loss from your regular job's income tax. So the taxpayer is literally paying you for your losing investment.
So you put those two policies together and boom, you've created a mathematical cheat code. Investors realize they could now intentionally lose money on a property, get a tax refund from the government for doing it, and then, when they sold the house for a huge profit, that new 50% discount meant they paid almost no tax at all. The entire economic operating system of the country was rewritten basically overnight.
And this wasn't just about housing prices getting crazy. No, this fundamentally rewired the entire power structure of the country. It created a system where the richest people weren't the ones inventing things, but the ones who just owned the toll booths.
Economists have a name for this. They call it a rentier economy. It's where you don't get rich by creating new value. You get rich by controlling something people already need. In Australia, though, it has a cozier, more sinister name, the game of mates. And at the heart of that game, you've got this little club, this oligopoly. It's a closed loop. The mining giants dig up the wealth, the big banks lend that money out as housing debt, the developers sell the overpriced land, and a tiny, powerful media cartel makes sure nobody in politics ever messes with the system. And if you think that sounds like an exaggeration, just look at what happened in 2010. The government tried to pass a small tax to get a fair share of a massive mining boom. The mining industry freaked out, launched a $22 million attack ad campaign, and within a few weeks, the prime minister was literally overthrown in a midnight coup by his own party.
His replacement immediately killed the tax. That's real power.
So what happens when a country decides to protect its monopolies instead of its innovators? Well, it starts to bleed out from the inside. The end result of this system is an economy that's been totally hollowed out and a nation that's now caught in a series of traps it can't escape.
This number right here, this is basically a death sentence for innovation. It's Australia's rank on the Harvard Atlas of Economic Complexity. That's a fancy way of measuring how smart and sophisticated a country's economy is. And let's put 93rd place into perspective because it's pretty shocking. Australia, a modern G20 nation, ranks way below countries like Vietnam and Bangladesh. It's just a couple of spots above Uganda. This is what you call a museum economy. You're not creating new, complex things, you're just selling off old assets and raw materials.
Then there's the political trap back home. It's driven by the NIMBY phenomenon, not in my backyard. You see, the country's biggest group of voters are homeowners, and they have a massive financial incentive to keep house prices high. So they fight tooth and nail to block new housing from being built, which creates a permanent artificial shortage. The source material calls this what it is: generational cannibalism. The older generation is securing its wealth by consuming the future of its own children.
And all of this leads to a geopolitical trap that's basically impossible to solve. You have this strategic schizophrenia, where Australia's entire economy depends on China buying its stuff, while its entire military defense depends on the United States. They're literally asking America to protect them from the very same country that pays all their bills.
Here's the thing. You can play games with tax codes. You can print a ton of money. But at the end of the day, you can't outrun basic math. For 20 years, this whole system was fueled by cheap, easy debt. But the era of 0% interest rates is over. And the final bill for the Australian dream, well, it's just arrived.
And this right here, this says it all. The country's entire stock market, all of its innovative, productive companies, the whole lot, is worth about $3 trillion. But the residential housing market, it's worth $12 trillion. 4 times more. All of the nation's capital, all of its wealth, is literally trapped inside the walls of old, unproductive houses.
When you think about it, Australia had a 30-year head start, an unbreakable run of prosperity. But instead of using it to build a resilient, complex, technological superpower, they cashed it all in to fund a housing casino. And the hard truth is that in the long run, history doesn't reward the countries that just look rich. It rewards the ones that actually build something that lasts.